Have you ever had a long journey where things did not go quite as you had planned, right? And you get weary and you are exhausted and you just need to find a place to rest. You need maybe a refuge. So maybe you're on a trip and your car breaks down or something like that, or you have to make a long trip that's kind of hard before you get to something that's even more difficult, like traveling to a funeral, and I've done those. And maybe your flight gets canceled and or something gets scrambled and you're kind of trapped between here and there, and everything's all messed up and you're just exhausted. I remember years ago I was set to attend this conference in Virginia, and I had to do a red-eye flight that went from like Washington State down to Los Angeles, then Los Angeles across to Washington, D.C. And if you think about your map, Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., like that's just about as far as you can go, right? Like those are on the opposite coast. And so the flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. got canceled, and I'm down there and it's late, and I was so tired. And they call these things a red eye for a reason, right? You've got those red eyes because you're awake all night. And so there I was kind of stranded in the airport, and finally I got a flight and kind of made my way across the country, and then I had to rent a car. And I remember driving that last couple of hours stretch to get to the conference and like slapping myself and putting the window down trying to keep awake because I was just so exhausted. Not the best situation, but I made it and got to the conference and just kind of collapsed into the bed. Right, I was laid there, right? I was so tired. So I don't know, maybe you've had something like that before. And sometimes life can feel like that. You can have this sense that there's just so much and it's so tiring and wearying, and you just kind of collapse into a place where you need that place where you can collapse. And 2022, we're launching 2022 today, and we're going to call this year the year of refuge. And I'll go into this a little bit more in a couple of weeks. We're going to do a series talking about taking refuge in God and taking refuge in Jesus. We'll go into that more. But today, I just want to give you a little teaser. We're starting off this year with Jesus' words in the Gospel of Matthew, where he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." This is the original come to Jesus moment. And sometimes we talk about come to Jesus, and we kind of use that as a phrase, like, you have a heart-to-heart with somebody, right? Like a get serious moment. Like I had a come to Jesus moment with so-and-so, right? Like that kind of a thing. Your kid's failing a class, and you sit them down, you say, look, you gotta get this figured out. You gotta work harder. It's a come to Jesus moment or whatever, right? That moment where you get serious. But in this original come to Jesus moment, it is not about confrontation. It is about rest. It's a word to weary people, a word to a weary world, to those who are struggling and seeking meaning. Come to Jesus. And that's, I just hope this year, whatever we do, both as individuals in our lives, but also as the church, whatever we do, that we can come to Jesus, that we can hear this word that he's given us here, which is stay close to the heart of Jesus. Now, when I look at this passage, in Matthew chapter 11, I really see two parts. And if you look at this, you'll notice that there's two major sections. So notice the first part. It's 25 to 30. Now notice 25 to 27. In my mind, this is the first part. And Jesus is saying, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth. It's really a prayer. And it's a prayer that he offers to God the Father in which he says something about who he is, right? He is the only begotten Son of the Father, right? Verse 27, no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son. This relationship is unique. We can become sons and daughters of God because we are adopted into that sonship, but his identity is unique. There's no one else like him. He is the Son of the Father. We talk about the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Here's where that language comes from. And that it's first part, 25 to 27, is talking about his identity, who he is. And then based on that identity, which is expressed in a prayer, there's the second part, 28 to 30. That second part starts with the word, notice it there, come. So the second part is an invitation. Come to me. So here's who Jesus is, And here's what he's calling us to do. He's saying, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. So the first part is a prayer and his identity. The second part is his invitation. And in that first part, we see not just that he is the Son, but really this language gets developed here that he is God's wisdom. He is the one who is there at the creation of the earth. He is the one that has all that we need to know to live our lives, right? And he even expresses that in the second part because he's saying, I'll give you rest. He says, you will learn from me. He says, my yoke is easy. He's saying, come to me because of who I am. And so I think about that, this first part, who Jesus is, that revelation, and then how the second part plays off of that. And in that second part, you could kind of see two different pieces, right? Come to me, all you who are weary. And then the second invitation in verse 29, take my yoke upon you. Now notice this, notice how it plays out. Come to me, and we'll look at the rest of what it says. All you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest, right? Now think about who this is for. In one way, Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and we know that in the work of following him, in discipleship, it can be hard, right? There's that place in the Gospels, like in Mark chapter 6, where it says that the disciples were so tired because they had been out preaching and healing and casting out demons, and he said they were so tired that they didn't even have time to eat. And he says, come with me, and let's go into a deserted place. And they go out into the desert, and that's where the feeding of the 5,000 happens. Now, it didn't work, his retreat. Like, he pulled them away in a retreat, but then all these people followed them. That's why it's the feeding of the 5,000 rather than the feeding of the 12, right? But you can get tired in the work of ministry, in the work of the church, right? Like, sometimes there's so much to do. Sometimes it just feels like overwhelming, right? But at the same time, I think this is first and foremost a word to the whole world, to people who are just weary because life is tough, because stuff happens. Just turn on the news, right? And he's saying, world, all you who are weary, come to me. And it's really a call to discipleship, that this word a little bit lower there where he says, learn from me. That word for learn is the same, it's the verb form of the disciple, so the mathetes. It's the mathes here, so learn from me. He's saying become a disciple, but here it's not like take up your cross and follow me. I mean, we know Jesus says that. He says that to become a disciple is to give up your life, and there's going to be challenges. He's calling us straight into the buzzsaw a lot of times as the disciples. But here it's just come and find rest, right? And that's the first step. I mean, before we can follow him in the hard places, we got to just be able to come to him and lay down our lives in trust before him. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. You know, think about that as we launch this new year. We'll just pause with that. You know, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. What are you carrying right now that's wearisome? What's on your back? What's on your shoulders that's really hard, that's making you tired? You know, what do you got going on at work? Or what have you got going on with family members? Where's your heart outside of your chest in worry? What's that place that you're carrying something hard? Hear Jesus' words for you. Come to me. There's no call to discipleship. There's nothing strenuous. He's just saying, I will give you rest. It's just saying, come to me. Where is that for you right now? And I think, you know, here's this moment. You see this in the Gospels that a lot of times Jesus just talks like this. He's like, wherever I'm at, it's going to be good. Wherever I preach the good news of the kingdom, it changes things. It's a word for a weary world and for weary people. Think about the Beatitudes a little bit earlier in Matthew chapter 5. You know, there is just a list of where people might be in tough situations. And he says, when you hear the good news, it will turn things around for you. So if you're poor in spirit, well, yours is the kingdom. If you are mourning because you've lost someone or something, well, you'll be comforted. If you are meek, those who have no power, well, you're going to inherit the earth. Or if you're hungry, you'll be filled. If you're persecuted, yours is the kingdom, right? So just come, hear it. You know, here's this word for Jesus. And it's a call to discipleship, but it's so important. Like you look earlier, like in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19, Jesus says, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men, right? There's immediately something that you've got to do. That's part of discipleship. But here, that's like coming after. But here's just come to, right? It's the first part, just come to. We can't do this by our own efforts. We can't work our way to follow him. We can't power through, right? It's all about just experiencing his grace and love in our lives. You know, every time I get myself in a stressful situation, maybe you're a little bit like this, my first instinct is just to power through, just work a little harder. And that's not always bad, right? But like, you know, I'm if I've got a lot to do, I'm just like, more caffeine, right? Just hit the coffee cup, right? I tried to give up coffee last year, but you can run, but you cannot hide from caffeine, is all I got to say. But, you know, just power through, just get it done, just stay up a little bit later, just work a little harder, just drive a little faster, power through. But Jesus is saying that's not going to work in discipleship. You know, there are moments that call for perseverance for sure, but he's saying, look, it's going to just have to be, come to me and I will give you rest. You're going to have to do this all from grace and more importantly from this living relationship, this active following. He's not just saying come, he's saying come to me, right? He's saying be with me, come into my presence. And the way we're going to do that is through the ancient tools of the church. He's saying pray, spend time in my presence, cultivate that awareness, be reading the Gospels so that you know who I am. Come to the Lord's table, experience my presence there. Just spend time with Jesus, right? However you have learned to do that, whatever God's been doing in your life to teach you and lead you into his presence, respond to that. Come to me. That's the foundation of discipleship. And really, I hope we can see that as the foundation of this year, just starting off, come to Jesus, right? And we know from Christian doctrine, from the teaching of the scriptures, that Jesus is present to us by the Holy Spirit. That promise is out there for every single human being. You don't have to be someone unique or special or do anything special. It's an invitation. Just respond. You see this even back in the Old Testament. God's always calling people to come to him. In Isaiah 55, he's like, come to me. You've got no money? Here, I'll give you money. Buy something that you need for a celebration. You have nothing. You're hungry. You're thirsty. Come to me. I'll give you food and drink. It's that invitation. And in fact, the end of the scriptures, the book of Revelation, wraps up with that great invitation. We're both called, let anyone who is thirsty come. Let anyone who is weak come. And then it wraps up with the prayer, come, Lord Jesus, our response to him. But it's always God taking that first step and seeking us, saying, just come to me. So whatever that is, that's what I hope you can hear as we begin this new year. Come to Jesus and just spend some time with him, right? You know, we can wonder how to do this, right? But if you try, if you just take a little step, he finds you. You just take one step and he comes running. I mean, he wants to be with us. Come to me. That's what Jesus said. And he says, and I'll give you rest. I don't know how that sounds to you. That sounds good, right? Sounds good to me. Come to me, you who are weary and heavy burden. I'll give you rest. You know, you see rest built in to the scriptures too. God rests on the seventh day. We know that that's not just God being like a human being, running out of pep, right, getting tired, needing to rest. That is God just taking pleasure and being present to his creation, right? God stops and just is. That's part of the message of the first chapters of Genesis and those words of creation. God just is in creation. He's not doing, he's just being. And we got to learn how to do that. And what I've noticed is that is harder and harder to do. I mean, there's so many temptations, not least those little devices, right? You can always stare at that screen, right? Just to go and constantly be like plugged in and sucking something up and always doing something, even if it's really nothing. And here's God saying, just come and I'll give you rest. Be present to people around you. And be present to me. Don't try to fill up the space. Just be. And you see this, especially like in the book of Hebrews, chapter 4. It says there is a Sabbath rest that still remains for the people of God. And in some ways, that is focused on what the Sabbath is for us, which is Sunday, the day of the Lord, the day of resurrection. But it's also a state of being. A Sabbath rest is kind of a state of mind. It is entering into that restful presence of God. You can be resting and doing throughout the week, but just being in that graceful resting presence. I think that's what Jesus is talking about. It's that soul deep rest. It is a rest that quiets our anxieties. It is a rest that sometimes carries us along. Come to me, all ye who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. There's a second invitation. Verse 29 says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, right? So learn. Now, you look at the scriptures, this word yoke. Think about what a yoke is. We know that the yoke was used in a couple of different ways. A literal yoke was used for animals, beasts of burden. You take 2 oxen or 2 mules or donkeys or whatever, you put the yoke on them. You can also do it with just one. It's this wooden thing. It's kind of got a little space for their neck. You put that on them, and then they can pull something. But there's another kind of a yoke. There is the yoke that human beings would use, which is also a wooden thing. You've probably seen pictures of this where you can put like 2 baskets kind of hanging from it and have like this bar, and that way you can carry something across your shoulders. So maybe you got to bring the vegetables to market. You put that yoke on your shoulders. You walk them to market, whatever that is. So it's this yoke. It's implying carrying something, and in one way it implies burden. But there's a figurative way that yoke is used in the scriptures. And you see this in the book of Acts chapter 15, verse 10. And they say, when they're discussing what's going to be the shape of this new Christian movement, are people going to have to follow all of the ancient teachings of the law of Moses? Do they have to be circumcised and follow the food laws? And do they have to follow all the stuff about keeping your clothing only made out of one kind of cloth and that sort of thing? Do we have to do all that? And they say, why are we going to put a yoke? The brightest lights of the church say this. Why are we going to put a yoke on these new believers that was too hard for even our ancestors to bear? And so the yoke is the teaching, right? It's the summary of what it means to follow in this way. You see that in some other places in the scriptures. And if we had the Apocrypha in the book of Sirach, in chapter 51, it talks about how the wisdom, God's wisdom, like from Proverbs 8, God's wisdom has a yoke, and you put on the yoke of wisdom so you can learn wisdom, right? And you can live in God's ways. It makes you think of like Psalm 1, right? 2 different paths, the good path and the bad path. So put on the yoke is to put on that body of teaching, that way of life, that in one way a burden, but Jesus says, my burden is light, right? Paradoxically, because it's not on our own efforts. Again, it's grace, but you're putting that on. You're saying, I will follow you. So rabbis use this imagery. They'd have a yoke. Whoever your rabbi is, you follow. You got his yoke. And so if you're following Rabbi Jesus, here's his yoke. And he says it's not hard. It's a light burden. He's saying, put that on. Learn from me, right? And it's come to Jesus, find rest. It's come to Jesus, take that yoke, learn from him. It's come to Jesus, and he says, notice this part, notice this. He says, you will find rest for your souls. But he says, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Right? There's that word heart. It's come to the very heart of Jesus. Know who he is. Now, the Pharisees, they had a yoke too. Jesus called them out for their yoke. You look at like Matthew chapter 23, verse 4. He says, he's just a series of calling out the Pharisees right there. Sometimes Jesus worked with the Pharisees, like Luke 13. They warned him. They said, Herod's going to kill you. You better watch out. But a lot of times Jesus had hard words for the Pharisees. He's trying to wake them up, trying to get them to change their ways. And in Matthew chapter 23, he says, look, you put a burden on people that is too hard for them to bear. Your yoke is hard. Jesus says, my yoke is easy, right? Come to me. And he's saying it's a yoke where I'm humble and gentle of heart. Come to the heart of Jesus. And I love that imagery, right? I love the idea of this heart of Jesus. Sometimes I pray a prayer. It's an ancient prayer. Heart of Jesus, help me, right? Just saying, Lord, bring me to your heart. And what I love about it is because if you think about what the heart is in biblical language, I mean, they knew something about physiology. They knew how our bodies worked in a lot of ways, but the heart is symbolic of the core of who we are. It's not just a blood-pumping organ. It's the center of us. And so to come to the heart of Jesus is to know him. It's to love him. It's to stay close to him. It's to let your character be shaped by him. He's gentle and humble of heart. It's to start to pick that up. Come to the heart of Jesus. And that gentleness, that love for others, that humility. I love gentle and humble of heart, right? There's an aspiration. Right? Take up that heart of Jesus. Take up that yoke? Can we be gentle and humble of heart? You don't see much of that in the world today, but you see it written all over the life of Jesus. I mean, look at his miracles. Jesus performs miracles, and a lot of times he's like, don't tell anybody what just happened. Or like he heals a leper, and he says, go tell the priest, right? He kind of disassociates himself from it. Or sometimes when he casts out a demon, they identify him. They say, what have you come to do with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? And he silences them. Or sometimes he releases someone. He says, don't tell anyone who it is, but word still gets out, right? Who did this, right? Or in Matthew chapter 16, they say, he says to his disciples, who do you say that I am? And they go through the options, and Peter gets it, and then he says, don't tell anyone, right? I mean, that's humility. Most of the time now, it's like, can we build up our platform? Can we have more Twitter followers, more friends on Facebook? Does everybody see what I just did, right? That's the way we live. But Jesus got this humility. And humility of heart, humility of heart is the heart of who Jesus is. I mean, this is Paul in Philippians chapter 2, where he says, in humility regard others as better than yourselves. And then he goes on to say, Jesus was in the very form of God, but did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself. That's what he does. He is humble. But he lives it out because no one is beneath him, and I think he's calling us to live the same thing. No one's beneath us. Nothing is beneath us, right? We're called to that humility. I mean, I think it's kind of a life goal, really, right? Can we learn this humility of Jesus, this gentleness of heart? Can we stay close to the heart of Jesus? And I see him modeling that. Henry Nouwen, who is he was a priest, he was a teacher, he spent time in a L'Arche community for disabled people in Toronto. Really an amazing individual, did a lot of writing. He's been influential to me. But Henry Nouwen tells the story of how early on, when he was trying to figure out life, and Henry Nouwen, he was somebody that even though he was such a great teacher, at the same time always had that sense that he wasn't good enough, or he didn't know enough, or he had been given more than he could really deal with. And he tells the story of how someone said to him early in life, Henry, even if you don't do anything very interesting in the eyes of the world, be sure you stay close to the heart of Jesus. And I think that's good advice. It's advice for life. We can think that we're here to kind of do something, our thing, our one thing, our big thing. But life is so much more complicated than that. And it rarely works out that there's a single thing that we just got to do. I mean, we're called to something more. I saw the other day, we had a little mini lock-in with the Junior Fuse youth group. We watched part of that mini lock-in. We stayed out just a little bit late, and we watched the movie Soul. I don't know if you've seen that. I mean, it's an imaginative movie. It's not a Christian cosmology by any means, but Soul deals with these questions of what happens after we die. And the main character has this sense that he was placed on earth for jazz piano. That was his talent. That was his desire, is become a jazz pianist. And I'm not really spoiling anything. Part of what he learns throughout the movie is that there's more to it than that. And there's not any one thing that will give all of your life purpose. And there's this moment where he lives his dream. He finally gets what he wants, and he just kind of sits there and he says, what do we do tomorrow? And the person goes, we come back and do it again, right? And it just seems to me like that's so much of our lives, right? There's that question of, well, what do we do tomorrow? Whatever you do, stay close to the heart of Jesus. What do we want our hearts to be, our lives to represent? Whatever you do, stay close to the heart of Jesus. And I think about even back in the Old Testament, that promise of the prophet Ezekiel. God says, I'll give you a new heart. Put a new spirit within you. I'm going to take out your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And the thing about this heart transplant, this movement of following Jesus, it's always going to take us somewhere beyond where we're able to imagine. If we're really following him, it's going to break down our framework and our categories. It's going to be more than what we think. And this is why it's not about rules, it's about coming to Jesus. Discipleship starts with that. Go to him, follow where he leads. Go to him, listen to what he says. Go to him, do what he calls you to. You won't always know what that is. It might not be the thing you think it's going to be. I know that's happened to me so many times in my life where I believe I've been sent to a person or a place or to a stage in life because of this thing. And I realize that, in fact, something else has happened. This little jag over here, that's what I've got to be paying attention to. And I think it's this a factor. The factor of it is that our imaginations are what are being shaped. Jesus is trying to help us imagine something that we have never imagined before. He's trying to give us a new heart. He's trying to change who we are, and so we cannot really imagine who we're becoming because we've never met that person. We've never met anybody like him or her, right? If you're following me, so Jesus is calling us to something that we can't imagine. In some place, the stuff we can imagine this new year, people make New Year's resolutions, and they're like, well, I'm gonna lose weight, or I'm gonna take a trip, or I'm gonna get a different job, or I'm gonna do something different in my life. We can imagine those sorts of things. That's just us being leaner and faster and stronger and wealthier, right? Whatever, our best selves. But Jesus is calling us to do something that we won't have thought of, to simply become more humble and more gentle. And maybe he's going to call us to something that involves some suffering, things that we wouldn't really choose for ourselves. And so I think this is what I hope we can hear in this new year, that we can just be open to wherever Jesus is leading us to, that we can come with a teachable spirit. Right? Someone once told me in like a review or something years ago, there's like, he's teachable. And I don't know quite what they meant by that, so I suppose it could be kind of a sideswipe, but I took it as a great compliment. Like, being teachable, right? Are we teachable? Can we come to Jesus and become students of his life and his heart and learn that path of humility and just watch how it plays out? And I hope we can hear that, but also verse 30, just take that to heart, that my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I mean, it's the same Jesus who said, take up your cross and follow me, but what he's saying is you can't power your way through it like a Pharisee. You just got to come to me, and whatever you're doing, just walk with me in it. And what I've discovered is that a lot of the things that matter most in life, they're things that we can only do by grace. They're paths that we can only trod by grace, right? It's life that we can only be present to by Jesus' grace. He's saying, come to me and experience that grace. It's not hard in one way. It's just being with me. And so here's a new year, 2022. This new year, brothers and sisters, whatever you do, stay close to the heart of Jesus. As individuals, whatever work, whatever play, whatever you've got as plans, whatever resolutions, whatever you do, stay close to the heart of Jesus. And as a church, whatever we do together, whatever decisions we make together within the next couple of weeks, and as our life together plays out in this new year, whatever we do, let us stay close to the heart of Jesus. We'll be okay if we do that. Whatever we do, come to Jesus in this new year. Amen.